here, and today we are talking about the emotional center in your human design. So the emotional center is also called the solar plexus. I just shorthand it to emotional center because that describes really the energy of it, which is emotional energy. So like every center of the 9 centers in the human design system, you can either be defined or not defined. When you're defined, that means that you are a naturally emotional person. And emotional, when you're a naturally emotional person from a human design perspective, it's more like it's not like getting choked up at a movie. It's a fundamental part of the way that you operate. So you're on an energy wave that's going up and it's going down and it's going up and it's going down. And if you're not emotionally defined, usually you're the one who gets choked up at movies and things like that, because what's happening for you is you're taking in the emotional energy and emoting. When you take that energy in, usually you'll emote it from the environment around you. So 50% of the population is emotionally defined. So most of the time, if you're open emotionally, then you are going to be taking in the emotional energy of others. And from a human design perspective, this is truly what the empathic design looks like, specifically for emotions and that wave of being up and being down. Many of you know I'm a mental projector, which means I have my throat defined and I have my ajna defined, and then every other part of my chart is open. And my experience of someone who's emotionally defined is I usually can tell at this point, and I'm about a decade into this experiment, and at this point I can usually tell if someone's emotionally defined before I even look at their chart, if I've been able to interact with them, because they feel solid to me. That's the best way I can describe it. There's a solidness there and there's a weightiness there. And that doesn't mean like being heavy and weighting down, though sometimes that is a part of the emotional wave. So how do you work with this energy? And how do you work with this energy specifically in relationships? Because it is where it can get a little bit bumpy, is to have someone who has a defined emotional center and someone who has an undefined emotional center. That can feel really intense for the person who's not defined emotionally, and it can feel very isolating maybe, or isolating or kind of shutting down for the person who's emotionally defined, who isn't having the experience of having that honored. So let's start with the emotionally defined person when we're talking about being in a relationship. First, the question that you need to have clarity on, if you're the person watching this with an undefined emotional center and wanting to know how to deal with being in a relationship with someone who's defined emotionally, is that person aware of their human design? Are they interested in embracing their human design and doing their experiment, or are they not? And this is something you should be really honest with yourself about. It can't just be like, well, they said they were interested, because a lot of people, especially people we love, will say they're interested in something just to like make us happy, and it's not necessarily the best dynamic culturally that we have, but it does exist. So you want to be really honest about, do they seem genuinely interested in pursuing living out their human design? And if they don't, that's okay. You're just going to approach it a little bit differently. So let's start with the category of they're not really that interested in doing the human design experiment. In that case, as someone with an open emotional center, there's going to be a few things that you should know. The first is, if the person who's emotionally defined does not feel safe with their emotions and hasn't come from a place where they can honor it, that's when the wave can get really, I'm going to say toxic, because that's kind of what it is. And it's toxic for them, but you're feeling it, so it can feel toxic for you as well. So what you want to be aware of is, are you being a safe space for them to be emotional? Most people are not nurtured in their emotionality. And the way that looks is they won't be in the mood to do something. And when they're not in the mood, then someone says, someone in their childhood usually, and then it just keeps playing out because of our social norms, get over it. pull yourself up by your bootstraps, get to it, whatever. Like, we don't have time for you to be out of the mood. Well, one way that you make it safe for them to honor their emotional wave is when they say they're not in the mood for something, to let it be, to let it go. Even if they committed to doing something with you or whatever the case may be, the emotionally defined person shouldn't necessarily be committing their energy to things, right away in the moment. And if they're not honoring the fact that they're emotionally defined, if they're not honoring the fact that they need time to make decisions, a lot of times they're going to make decisions that later aren't going to feel correct for them. And if you can let that be, that's going to allow them to naturally sync up with their moods and with their ups and with their downs. And now, this isn't about you sneaking around them not wanting to do the human design experiment. It's about you just seeing them and honoring them for who they are. You don't have to tell them to follow it for you to know this isn't personal. The fact that they're not showing up now, or they're all of a sudden in a mood and they were never in a mood before, isn't personal. It's not a personal dynamic going on. It's not to slight you, or it doesn't have anything to do with you. And being able to recognize that places you in a position of power, and it also creates a safe space in which the relationship is happening. The other thing to do when you're in a relationship with someone who's emotionally defined, who is not wanting to pursue their human design experiment, is to understand when they're on their low part. And for you to remove yourself from that situation. You can do it loving and kind, and you don't need to say, like, you're on the low part of your wave, so I'm leaving. Because again, remember, they're probably not okay with that even being true about themselves, even if they know it to be true. But when you sense that heaviness in them, and you sense that heaviness within yourself, and it's just, there's this, I don't want to call it icky because I don't want to dishonor anyone's kind of state of being, but from the perspective of someone who's not emotionally defined, that down period does feel kind of icky because we're not designed for it. When you're designed for it, it can be something really creative and juicy for you, but when you're not designed for it, you're not designed for it. It's about honoring your design. So if you can get yourself out of that space, go to a cafe, go to the park, go wherever you need to go, to just let them be and let them be kind of cocoon, then I would suggest doing that. If they insist on going with you, I would just say that you're wanting some alone time, or you're wanting, if you have a child with you who's also not emotionally defined, and say it's like you're married to them, just say like, we're going to go have a mommy or a daddy play date, just the two of us. Do it in whatever loving, compassionate way you can, and don't make them wrong. But this is about honoring your own design and knowing that in that space, it's really not a good time for you to be communicating. The other part of that is, of course, if conflict comes up, if you're negotiating on a matter, if you're making life decisions and you sense that heaviness, being able to lead that conversation and put it on pause, put it on a back burner until your partner's in a better place within themselves is a way that you can manage that situation for yourself, not to manage them. Now, let's talk about a partner who is emotionally defined and does want to pursue living out their human design and really embracing that about themselves. Well, you're going to take into account everything that I just talked about, except it's going to be more open. You're going to have a dialogue with them and be able to be in a space where you can say, hey, it feels like you're heavy right now. Are you on the low swing of your emotional wave? And if they say yes, then you can nurture them and say like, okay, well then this is the time for you to be down and for you to have your alone time and for you to do whatever processing you need to do. And it's totally cool. It's also a time where you can like give them permission and tell them it's a creative time period. A lot of time in our world, particularly if you're involved in the personal development world or the spiritual world, it's like be high vibe, be happy, be this all the time. But half the population is not fundamentally that all the time. And what they're sharing with us and where they can be examples for us is in this up and down cycle of creation. It's almost as if they're living out a microcosm of dark nights of the soul. It's not as deep as like a fundamental lifetime dark night of the soul, which you can have whether or not you're emotionally defined or not, but it's almost as if that archetype is alive in them. And for those of us who are not defined there, we're witnessing that, and that's where we're gaining our wisdom, right? Where people are defined, they impact the world. Where we're not defined, we gain wisdom as a result of processing that impact. And so having really open conversations about where they are on their wave, and you honoring your space and taking it when you need it, and you also honoring their space and understanding that more likely than not, it's never been okay for them to be emotional. And because they always have that emotional energy, since it's innate to them, they have almost certainly developed coping mechanisms where they don't need to emote when they don't need to emote. My father was emotionally defined, deeply emotionally defined. He was a Vietnam vet. He was Irish Catholic. He was born in 1943. None of these things really added up for it to be okay for him to be moody or emotional or anything like that from a cultural norm point of view. And really, he did not emote that often. But I always had the sense and that if pushed, if it finally came out, that it would be big, like really big. And he struggled with depression for most of his life, clinical depression, because of not being able to honor that way. So the compassion that's asked for us, being open, is for them getting that society-wise, we don't like emotion, and we don't like vulnerability, and we don't like the unpredictability of that, and we assign it to certain genders, and then we assign negative things to it. Getting that they've had that baggage their whole life, and they need some safety around that. That's a way to be really supportive in it, but also reminding yourself of what boundaries you need to be keeping. So now let's talk about the open emotion center and how to manage that as far as an energy center. So when you're open, you're taking in energy, you're amplifying energy. This is for you to gain wisdom. This is for you to understand the variety of the expression of that inner energy archetype that gets expressed in all humans, but it's always unique to each human. It's part of that wisdom, is gaining the wisdom of the uniqueness that is inherent in every individual. So what you're learning to deal with is, one, releasing emotions that you may have held on to, and two, getting when it's yours or you're not. And that's really the biggest question you should be asking yourself most of the time, and that's how I've been able to process most of mine, which is this. When I'm feeling emotional, when I'm feeling all of a sudden moody, or if I'm feeling all of a sudden really up, right? If I'm feeling any of this empathic stuff, then I'm asking myself, is this mine? Now the answer may be yes. It's not like when you don't have emotional definition, you never have emotions. Of course you do. We all have emotional lives, and some of it is unique to us. Certainly with my parents passing away, I grieved, and there was a lot of authentic, native emotional energy to me that needed to be processed. Now, there are plenty of other times, more times than not, in which I'm just emotional. I'm just taking it in from the environment. And, you can call it your higher self, you can call it your place of wisdom, whatever you want to call it, that voice of truth. When you ask yourself, is this mine? It will usually answer. Now, a lot of times, at least my experience is I would question the answer that I would get back. Be like, am I sure? Am I trying to hide something from myself? Am I not processing something? And what I eased into and was able to relax into over the years, and what I would, invite you to do sooner than I did, was, you can trust that voice of truth in you. You're really not defined emotionally. So a lot of times the answer is going to be, nope, not mine. And sometimes the answer will be yes. And when you get the answer, nope, not mine, you've already done what I'm going to suggest, which is to screen the emotion versus sponging the emotion. The habit that we tend to have, for those of us who don't have definition in our emotional centers, we feel that emotion, and for everything that we've learned in our life, we have every reason to believe that's ours. And we don't even question it. And when you identify with it, just like with anything, when you identify with it, you make it yours. You make it real to you. And then it needs processing. That's sponging. But as soon as you ask the question, is this mine? You've already broken the pattern of accepting something to just be yours, and your voice of truth comes up and says no, and then you can screen it. And you can witness it, you can work with it, you can allow it to enrich your experience of the other person or yourself or whatever. But that will help keep that energy center clear for you and help you to gain the wisdom of it. Now, part of the wisdom that you're gaining with an open emotional center is truth telling. Those of us who don't have that center defined, we often develop a habit of eggshell walking on eggshells, right? So we're saying half truths a lot of the time. We are softening our speech. We are preparing ourselves for blowout. It's not fear like you would find in the spleen. It's not a survival-based fear, but it is an emotional protection that we're doing. So what we begin to do is we begin to be able to stand in our truth and tell it, and it doesn't matter what the emotional feedback is, because we've developed the ability to allow it to go through us, to allow it to pass through us. So one of the tools I want to give you, if you're new to this and you're still processing whatever backlog you have of emotional energy, I also had a lot to do with that after my parents passed away, because my dad was deeply emotionally defined and our charts connected in a lot of ways, and we were very close. So I took on a lot of heaviness from that relationship, and one of the things that helped me the most was doing the work of Byron Katie. I went to the school for the work with Byron Katie, and for 9 days I didn't stop crying. My eyes looked like cheese puffs around them, but it's what I needed. And you don't even have to be working on something directly. You can watch movies that make you cry. I watch America's Got Talent, right? And just allow yourself to just release that energy and allow it to flow through you. And just remember, overall, this is about safe space. It's about safe space for you, and it's about safe space for anyone you're in a relationship with who is emotionally defined. And I would say the last thing about people who have emotional definition, what works really well for them, and from the people I've worked with and people I've been really close with who have this definition, is they don't want to be fixed. And we who are not emotionally defined can be a little bit guilty of wanting to immediately fix it because we're so uncomfortable with what we're feeling within ourselves. So again, as you start to ask this question of, is it mine? You can be comfortable with that energy being in your space because you're allowing it through. And you can also relax into, there's nothing to fix about this person. They are on the low part of their wave and it's fine. And that's what I would suggest working with. I hope this was helpful. If you have more questions, feel free to shoot them into the Unicorn MBA. And as always, I always suggest getting a personal reading with someone that you resonate with, because everyone truly is completely unique, and your chart reads in a very unique way as a full expression of you. So it is important to get a reading with someone who can kind of walk you through that and mentor you through that. All right, love you, bye.